He's currently building a stealth startup in the software dev and generative AI space along with Akash. Akash was a CPO of Gojek and then at Jiva. They're both working together since 2010 and we'll be talking about their experience running large teams. So take it away, Sidu and Aakash.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for having us. Um, I was talking to Siva earlier today about the kind of mix in the audience, and I think generally we are biasing towards a lot of experienced senior people. And I think in these kinds of situations, I've actually found that these conversations tend to be more productive in a more open-ended discussion type format. So one thing is, please don't hesitate at any point while we're talking to just raise your hand and take the mic. Right. Just only thing I would request is raise your hand. The second thing is that Akash and I are going to run this as a somewhat conversational uh, piece because what we're going to talk about here is very core to how we think about stuff and is based on a lot of stuff that we collaborated on over the last few years and is actually at the core of a lot of what we're doing right now in our new company. So the two of us are going to run through this very quickly. The idea is, uh, let me just skip through the first bits. This is Akash. This is me. Siva's already talked about this, but we've been here for in this industry for 17 years. We've done many startups together, a few jobs, not together, and except for Gojek, and we've had one exit together, right? So yeah, this is kind of what I wanted to set as the sort of the framework here. We're going to try to keep the talk short and conversational because for more senior people, it's much more productive to get into specific questions and discuss those things. And as I said, please don't hesitate to just raise your hand along the way. This is going to be the quick flow we run through. What is the problem statement we're talking about? Some of the labels, I think, which get bandied about very casually, but definitions are important. We've got three key concepts in how we approach this problem, the implications, and then we'll go to Q&A, right? So this is the structure of what you're planning to do today. So let's go straight to the problem statement, right? I don't know how many of you have experienced this, but for both Akash and me, consistently, whenever we've tried to scale up product development along any axis, system scale, headcount scale, um, budget scale, honestly, it has turned into a disaster. Right? There are many different sort of attributes of that disaster. I use a very broad term when I say disaster, but it starts with things like sudden spike in bugs, downtimes, and spirals out into all sorts of other sort of symptoms, starting with things like a very common thing that we now look for is the statement that, hey, everything was working just fine. Whatever we wanted to do, we could do. It was just, we would all just talk about it, and then the next thing you know, in a couple of days, a week, whatever, pick some short period of time, we'd have our idea in production. And now suddenly nothing's moving. And the specifics of is moving is very different for sort of different occurrences of this problem. In some cases, people would report that we just couldn't agree on what to build. In other cases, it was, oh, we knew what to build, but somehow it would just keep getting stuck. It wouldn't go out, or it would go out, but the quality would be an unmitigated disaster. Right? These are the kinds of examples of what would go wrong. And generally, the end result is that getting anything out of the door just becomes increasingly challenging. And even more interesting is that any attempt to address this slowness to make things faster would have all sorts of unintended side effects, right? And would not work in effect. So this is kind of the problem statement, I think, that we want to talk about. Akash, anything you want to sort of comment on here? Anything I missed?
No, you covered all flavors of disaster there.
Okay. So I think somewhat this is an interesting conversation to have, because whenever I talk to people and they're like, "Hey, stuff is starting to feel slow," uh, I found that there's a lot to unpack there. People say, "Hey, we're scaling up. My teams are slow. How do I make them faster?" Right? And this is something that Akash and I talk about constantly, because this was the core of our lives for 5 or 6 years at Gojek, where there were just more teams, and everything kept getting slower, and we wanted to make it faster. And I think the interesting thing we realized over time is that uh, a lot of the conversation just falters simply because these seemingly obvious words actually have a lot of different meanings to unpack depending on who you're talking to and when. So, let's start with the most obvious stuff, right? Akash, what is a team according to you? Like, what is the difference between an individual and a team?
I mean, we have always looked at team as almost like a distributed processing units, right? Everybody is managing their own CPUs. They have their own sort of memory, understanding their programs. So when, let's say, an individual machine is sort of an individual node is getting slow or fast, it's rarely because of the capacity. It's typically boils to either knowledge or just sort of competency. But when I'm looking at a team, I would say more than two people probably coming together. That's team for me. Now, of course, there are abstractions that go up, but you can also think that now you have different clusters that come together. Right? So I can have a team of teams, for example, or I can have a team of teams. Gojek, I think towards 2018 or so, was literally some 3 or 4 main legal entities, but God knows, honestly, we don't even know how many. Legal entities across 5 different countries, all trying to work together and actually having dependencies on each other. Like, for example, launch Thailand completely depended on some sort of a refactoring happening in Indonesia or in India. So yeah, it's the number of clusters and the complexity sort of goes in place.
Super. So, this is something that I want to sort of throw open to get some diversity of opinion, right? So I'll frame the question like this. Usual, right? Show of hands, please, and pitch in. Let's say, Akash mentioned that the moment I have more than one person, like 2 people plus, I consider it a team. What I want to ask the room is, let's say I put 10 people together. Is it a team? I mean, I've crossed Akash's threshold. Anyone? I mean, obviously, by Akash's criteria, it crosses, but what I'm implying here is there are many reasons why a group of 10 people are not a team. And this is exactly the kind of hand-wavy MBA question which we used to just dismiss casually back in the day, and suddenly we started realizing that it's super, super important. So, yeah, I mean, feel free to raise hands or just comment. Yeah, we already got one comment. They might not be working towards the same goal. Okay. Anyone else want to raise hands? And yeah, it
So,
depends.
like, they could be like people, like a collection of people could be working towards, like, it's because they're brought together. It doesn't mean that they would be working as a team. Like, they have to have some goals in order to meet the goal of, like, the final target or something like that way.
Have
I,
some goals, but let's say we give them a goal.
can
Does
I?
that mean they're a team?
Oh yeah. Can I chime in?
Of course, please.
Yeah. Hi, this is Mayank. So it's not merely as straw man or simplistic as putting 10 people together. They need to have a goal. They need to have some kind of a mission. They need a buy-in. They need to understand their modes of communication, and they need to understand each other's work style in a way that complements each other. Only then would I even begin to call it a team.
Okay. Awesome. That was fairly comprehensive. Sorry, I'm just switching between hand and chat to see, right? So some other comments from the chats, I'm just reading it out. So Radhakrishnan says they might be independent of each other. Yes, we talked about that. Abhiram mentions depends on how many people with complementary, supplementary skill sets is required for the work at hand. Yes. A group of individuals who bring the right skill set and have the composition needed to deliver their objectives and deliverables. Okay, let me mess with you a little bit more, right? All valid. What are the metrics that you would look at which would tell you that a group of people is operating as a team versus not? Like, you don't have the luxury of being a line manager sitting with them every day. You want to look at some external sort of metrics to give you that sense. How would you judge?
Assuming that there is a Scrum board, which is, or some kind of a dashboard which is maintained and people actually put in reasonable numbers, you can actually look at the heartbeat of what is being checked in and delivered, as well as sort of mine some information from the interactions on GitHub or whatever tool that you use, and you can use that to get a good sense of whether the team is functioning cohesively or not.
Yes, but what metrics would you look
at? Let's say speed of delivery, which means that not just code being written, but actually deployed to production. Feedback loops, to quote Donald Reinstein, principles of flow-based development, and to see if the work is bursty in nature versus a smooth pipeline, which actually ends up delivering value.
Awesome. We have a second hand, Gaurav.
Yeah, so I think you asked how would I evaluate when something works as a team or not. I think it's a matter of delivering common artifacts, and that could probably apply anywhere, right? Like if a team is building a business together, that business itself is your artifact. In our industry, it could be code, it could be an application that you deploy, it could be a binary that you ship somewhere, or it could be a document, a PRD that you're working together. So I would say if you have common artifacts that come as the output of people doing their jobs, that's a team.
How would you tell that it isn't just a bunch of people individually working, passing it from one to the other, not actually collaborating? It's entirely possible to produce an artifact. And I've seen this frequently. It's just a team of individual, so-called team of actually highly individual people.
That's where the feedback loops come in, right, Sidu?
Yes. So, man, hang on. We are jumping to the next slide. You have read the right books already.
Alrighty, yeah. I will keep quiet. I will not give spoilers.
Yes. Anybody?
But I guess that's more of like how functioning or how well functioning the team is, but it's still a team, right? Like as you also described it, as a team of individuals, right?
So that was me being leading. Now, we've taken a bit of time on this. So now, let me get to my real point here. My real point over here is, if you look at the conversations we've had so far, we don't have any reliable way to evaluate this. Or rather, it's not that we don't have a reliable way. We all have our own opinions, and those are very diverse. Fair? Like the point I'm trying to make over here is, the concept of a team itself tends to be subjective. And honestly, it can get very hard to distinguish a bunch of individuals executing versus a group actually collaborating. Okay. So let's just put a pin in that. I do want to try to build a consensus around this with more discussion. And we have arguments to make, Akash and I. But what I really wanted to establish here is that this is hardly one of those things. Like we go around saying, yeah, team, but we don't really have a good consensus around, when a group of people actually is a team versus not, right? The next two questions, I think, again, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
On the teams. So Mayank gave an amazing definition of a team. Unfortunately, I don't think I've ever worked with any group which really checks all the boxes. So sort of building that team, like getting everyone together in that particular state in itself actually is a work where this whole fast flow discussion that we're going to have will be really, really helpful. Because that ideal team just really doesn't exist.
Well, I would, politely disagree here, because supply chains function literally in this fashion, and any global supply chain of any repute which has been in the industry for more than 3 to 5 years, by necessity has to operate this way. So I would love to give you examples, but maybe towards the end of the conversation.
Sure, absolutely.
So the next label, I think, and they're related, right? And we can pick them up together, is essentially the same question as a team, right? When do you know that things are slow? How do you know that things are slow versus how do you know when things are fast? How do you know when we're building stuff quickly or we're building stuff slowly? Anyone want to take that?
Hi, Sidu. This is Sudhir. Sorry, folks, raise the hand.
No, please go ahead. We'll go to Ram next.
All right. So there is a lot of this research around. I'm like, when do we know that engineering teams are moving fast and slow? There is a lot of research that Google has done calling Dora Metrics DevOps Research Assistant. And I am the founder of Highwell.ai, where we spend a lot of time in these areas, right? It's very hard. First of all, it's a very hard question. The definition of slow and fast is very, very subjective, right? It's more about like identifying some outcome-based metrics and understanding universal language, like irrespective of your process, setting a baseline, and then you kind of define if you're moving better than yesterday or worse than yesterday, right? Slow and fast can be the number of releases, but at the same time, not at the cost of impacting your quality, correct? So it's a lever that you need to have across multiple pillars of speed, quality, and throughput, and ensuring that you have these outcome-driven metrics, like how many PRs are pushed, like what is are they reviewed, all of those things, and how many hot fixes or change failure rate is happening, is something that would help engineering teams generally identify if a company is moving or an engineering team is moving slow or fast.
Would you apply the same logic across the life cycle, not just engineering?
Every function will probably have its own version of, especially when you wanted to measure something in an objective way. Every function needs to have their own thing, right? For sales team, it is about hitting their quota and hitting their quota on time, correct? Whereas for engineering team, it's different. So moving slow and fast has to be broken down from a subjectivity to objectivity in the first place. And then something, where a universal language where irrespective of you're a CTO, CEO, CFO, we're all talking about the same numbers, same metrics, right? So the data brings in that language.
Awesome. Ram?
Yeah, I think in my opinion, fast and slow are more of a relative and more about perception than, I don't think there is a definition that we can give. I worked in teams where I perceived that the teams were slow, but rest of the folks felt that they were fast, and also the vice versa. I think the closest definition that I feel is, if a group agrees to achieve something within a time with a certain quality and with certain parameters, and if they meet it within that timeline, or if they can exceed it a bit, I think that they might think it as fast, versus if they don't meet, they might take it as slow. I think to me that's the closest. Otherwise, any parameters that you define, if there's no agreement to it, the other person might still feel it is as slow or fast.
That's actually a great sort of talking point that keeps coming up, right? In a lot of the conversations we end up having, which is that going out on a limb here, most CTOs tell me that their CEO feels that things are slow, right? For example, I think it's a very common conversation. So I think what I want to sort of nail down over here is that most of the time that these terminology get thrown around and used, it isn't to say that the assessment is incorrect. The point is that the assessment is subjective and intuitive, and that making it objective is a non-trivial exercise, right? And making it objective is A, a non-trivial exercise, and B, not just in time and effort, but in terms of just the probability of reaching some kind of an objective number which you can trust, right? Akash, anything you want to add over here?
Yeah, the problem is not just subjective. Like the definition of fast and slow is of course going to be subjective because every team has different capabilities over there. And the point is not to compare two teams and say that, hey, that team is faster than this team. It's never going to be a productive conversation either way. The real question is that are we going as fast as we could? So like first is that particular conversation. And the real problem here is because we are now looking at like they define speed over here is, let's say, how fast the features come in or how fast we are able to fix bugs. Because the conversation is about the speed, we don't look at the root causes of what makes us fast or slow. Because the conversation is really about the speed of delivery rather than what really affects. It's like have a bacterial infection and I keep taking paracetamol. It's like that. But yeah, I guess we'll cover in the next one.
Cool. So, just sort of recapping, it's hard to understand whether the problem, when you sense that there is a problem as you scale up, it's hard to sense, to form a clear opinion alone as to whether the problem is because your team is not functioning as a team. It's probably equally hard to build consensus with others around this, right? So we're kind of stuck with a subjective opinion here. Equally, I think it came out pretty clearly in the discussion so far that probably what we can anchor on for sure on slow and fast is we can look at it as a relative thing with some reasonable confidence that are we going faster than we were last week or 2 weeks ago, or are we going slower? That I think even leaving it intuitive and subjective, we can make with some confidence. But again, bringing this down to an objective sort of a number which you can discuss and agree upon with other people, especially when the other people are from a fundamentally different background. And as I said, the favorite sort of hotspot tends to be CEO, CTO conversations around this, right? That remains challenging, right? So, Mayank, would you care to expand on that?
There are two Mayanks in the call. I'm assuming you're directing that to me.
To Mayank Banerjee. What about business outcomes?
I would say that just talking about feature deliverables in isolation is not, or is a very narrow definition of speed, right? Ultimately, we're not running charities. We are delivering value to the customer. And unless we measure that in terms of business outcomes, which are delivered in a timely manner, then, everything else goes out of the window, right? You could
absolutely valid.
Be the fastest team around, but it doesn't make sense if the business outcome is not achieved, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically just running a feature factory, extremely high throughput feature factory doesn't necessarily mean anything, right? Is that a fair sort of rephrasing?
Yes and no, but we'll come to that later, Sidu. I don't want to hijack your talk.
Sure. Cool. Swanand mentions that to that point, speed is not a goal, speed is a strategy. Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on, right? Like, I think what I wanted to establish is conversations around this remain challenging fundamentally because of the difficulty with the meaning of these terms. And what I want to sort of keep the focus on when we attempt to address these issues is that unless you're running at massive scale, where I'm talking about hundreds of engineers and the relevant ratios of product managers, etc., etc. Personally, I tend to take the stance that a relative measure is good enough. It cannot be intuitive because that intuition can be problematic, and it can be difficult to make these references across different teams in the same organization. But for a particular team, we can actually meaningfully anchor on a few simple things to judge whether we're going faster or slower than yesterday. And for most scales that are sub like massive scale, that's good enough, right? And to sort of share 3 key concepts that we use to reason about the problem, right? Thinking tools, if you will. And the 3 thinking tools that we lean on when we are doing these kinds of improvements is, one is that focus is a currency. I mean, we'll expand on these. Second is fear is the mind killer, and the third is turbulence isn't velocity. Right? All of these are borrowed from different aspects of pop culture, because that's a unfortunate habit I have, including smooth is fast, right? Which apparently has its origins, as far as we know, from the US Navy SEALs. Focus is a currency, as far as I've been able to trace it, comes from motorcycle racing lore.
Also, US Marine lore. Focus as a currency is part of their warfighter manual.
Also US Marine lore. Yeah. Okay. So then smooth, 2 things from US Marine lore. Fear is the man killer is, of course, Dune. And turbulence isn't velocity is me attempting to prettily rephrase something that came up earlier, right? So we'll expand on that. Now, focus as a currency is approaches this through a very simple lens. It says that as a individual or as a team, you have a limited amount of conscious decision-making bandwidth available to you on any given day. And if you have to use that focus to make decisions for routine, known events, when unexpected things happen, you will have nothing left. Okay. Now, the simple real life example of this is when you drive a car or ride a motorcycle. When you first start out as a new driver or a new rider, you have to very consciously think about when are you going to press the clutch, when do you change the gear, when do you press the brake. And every time you do these things, it uses up focus. Now, I understand that there may be a section of the folks in the room who do not drive or ride, so I apologize for that. But for the rest, I'm sure that at a very instinctive level, this would resonate with you, because you would remember when you first started driving that if somebody suddenly crossed the road, it would trigger a panic, because you just do not, you don't know how to do everything at once, because you've got to hit the clutch, you've got to hit the brake, you've got to turn the steering wheel. You may even need to downshift because you don't want to stall the car when you let the clutch in after that. Arnav points out that's another great example, right? For those of you that remember typing before you learn to touch type versus typing after. So the idea over here is you want to figure out everything that your team does that is routine, that you know will happen, and to establish a set of steps for each of those events and then practice them to a point where both at an individual level and a team level, nobody is having to think about what to do. A great example of this is a production outage. What is your SOP? How does the on-call person, summon everybody else? what are the steps that you follow to diagnose? Like, what is the Pareto's law process for diagnosing the source of the outage? How do you communicate the fact that an outage exists to the relevant other teams? Maybe sales needs to know, maybe marketing needs to know, maybe customer support needs to know, whatever, right? These are not things that we really thought about much in the beginning when we started dealing with this as things scaled up. And it hurt us. And until we started putting SOPs in place and the team slowly trained up on those, these things remained a problem. Now, this concept generally is almost organically or intuitively applied for the very obvious problems, like the example I gave of a production outage. But a more subtle example of this that I love to cite is what happens when your build goes right. Because when I first started out and I took this for granted, we had an SOP for a build going right, but I've never seen that since, right? And I think this, you basically can apply this thinking to pretty much everything that happens that a team has to deal with. And that takes conscious decision making, and then try to convert it to unconscious decision making. Right? That is the expansion of this term. Yeah, sorry, Aakash, go ahead.
We can actually, there are two sides to the coin here, right? We are clearly arguing that focus is the currency, and we are saying that, hey, everything that people need to do, let's standardize it, let's put up an SOP over there, let's take them to the practice so that they don't have to think about it. What we need to maybe also look at is, let's assume that everything is standardized, then what are we saving focus for, right? And that's where specifically, I mean, certainly in the software engineering world, you really can't standardize everything. And the reason you want to keep that currency as like a budget with you, as you standardize more and more things, fundamentally people will spend that focus on a day-to-day basis on more and more nuanced aspects. So the ROI that you get out of thinking deeply comes out of your ability to save your focus away from things otherwise where you are spending on the same thing again and again and again. And I will take this particular pattern to something really as mundane as saying your story template, right? Like I've been a developer, I've been a product manager. Why do you want a user story template? Like that user story template is nothing but a SOP for requirements passed on, because that requirement is not there. As a developer, I'm writing something. I write if I know that I'm supposed to write else now, and the problem is like the else is not specified. Now I basically go through multiple sets of people over there. So not just for these exceptional scenarios where things are going wrong, but applying that SOP as a way of conserving focus where people don't get distracted. You reduce the number of exceptional circumstances in people's life, however mundane they may be or however exciting they may be, is where the focus of the currency applies, like across these details.
Cool. Of course, please, folks, questions or comments, please feel free to keep the comments coming in the chat or raise your hand if you have questions, either way, right? So moving on, the second thing that we like to, sort of look at is the fear is a mind killer one, right? And what we mean by this is examples like where teams say, let's not deploy on a Friday. Or I'm scared to merge this PR. Or, I don't really want to handle this this customer request, this customer support ticket, because, I really don't want to, I'm afraid of the code base. Like I'm scared I'm going to spend the next, 5 days digging into this and still not figure out what's going on. For us, when we look at this fear is a signal of a problem area, and it dramatically impacts the ability of a team to pick up something, right? Yeah, Ankur, great point, right? Like fear of committing to a timeline. So fear of the mind killer is a straightforward one, right? There is this very obvious symptom where we are afraid to do something. It's even more noticeable in that we didn't used to be afraid to do this, and now we are, right? And for us now, we look for those transition points. We're like, hey, wait, now we've become scared to do this thing. So you know, the concept over here that we want to flag is teams should not be afraid to do something. I mean, exception to this would of course be like regulated environments, right? Like if you're doing like something financial and you don't want to be like gung ho about that stuff. But outside of that, there should be no fear, at least nothing internally generated, right? Akash, any nuance you want to add to this?
Sorry, I was busy with Kshitij's comment over there. Kshitij is asking a very interesting question. Like, in the start of the talk, you mentioned various ways the problem can surface. When you can sense something's going wrong, how long do you wait to take the painkillers? More importantly, why do you not start with the vitamin when you know it exists? So vitamin has a cost, or rather the painkillers have a cost, and you're also trying to reserve the focus on some of the problems.
I would also say that a lot of this just doesn't exist at smaller scales, right? There is something I now have sort of pinch of salt that I with caveat emptor. I just think that human beings are great at self-organizing below a certain headcount, and all of this stuff just mostly takes care of itself if you hire good people. The problem is if you start taking the vitamins for all of these problems, then you're actually going to slow the team down and cause way more harm than good. The problem is that as you scale the teams up, both the individual teams plus team of teams plus team of teams, that's when the overheads of attacking these problems start to become justified because of the price you pay. But early stage small teams, you really don't want to bother with any of this stuff. Fair, Akash?
I tend to call this the curse of being Cassandra, right? If you've been on the other end of the spectrum, and then you go and join a really small early stage team, they'll look at you like, what the hell is he talking about?
Why is this guy such a doom and gloom person all the time, right? Just sees disaster looming every
yes. So, but the flip side of that, and you really hit the nail on the head, Sidu, is it's an opportunity cost, right? You at an early stage, the opportunity cost of chasing after structures like CI/CD or proper monitoring and things like that, versus actually delivering a feature which will bring in that initial revenue that will help you scale. I mean, it's a trade-off. It's always a trade-off. So I don't know if that answers. Who asked the question?
Kshitij.
Kshitij. Yeah. So the answer is always it depends. And at what time?
I don't know, Mayank, if you or others in the audience have seen or are familiar with SVS, who's the ex CTO of Shadi and InVideo. But he has this amazing talk on analogies between software dev and jazz teams. And I think the jazz team analogy really resonated with me for early stage small teams, right? You just want really good, really experienced people who can just show up and jam. And what they produce when they show up and jam is going to just casually outperform any amount of planning upfront, right? And you don't want to mess with that mojo. That's really Kshitij to answer, right? Like a good early stage team is like amazing mojo. You don't want to mess with that stuff with the process. But the problem is the transition. Like at a certain point, what happens is stuff starts to go down. And then the painful conversation is with this team of very successful jazz musicians is like, hey, look, this stuff doesn't scale, unfortunately. And now you're going to have to just cope with increasing amounts of process and discipline. And there's not much you can do about it, right? I think his deck is online. I mean, I don't want to search for it right now, but I think the deck is definitely online. But yeah. And the last point over here that I want to talk about is turbulence isn't velocity, right? Turbulence isn't velocity is this is the term we use for this feeling where you're going pedal to the metal, right? You're pushing, you're trying really hard. Like symptoms of this would be pulling weekends, working late nights, sort of an extreme level of aggression in how you work. And that operating in bursty ways in the team can give the feeling of going fast, of velocity. Whereas when you actually step back and look at your numbers, like my experience has been, you actually are generally significantly slower than before. It's just that for most teams, they don't have those relative metrics to look at, which gives them a sense of this.
There are
Right.
two nuances here, I would say. Not even nuances, right? Two facets here. One is, even if, let's say, you do get some speed, you are certainly creating enough debt across the board, be it organizational, code level, knowledge base level, whatever it is, your stakeholder expectations, however you want to put it, that ultimately you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. The second thing is, actually, you may not even be going faster. What you just feel is an adrenaline because now you're doing something different than your normal state. Like
You're trying harder.
Metric, right? I think someone mentioned like really good metrics, Sudhir, if I'm not wrong, right? He basically mentioned about the Dura metrics. That's amazing, actually. Like if you start actually tracking those metrics, you look at teams who are pulling all-nighters over the weekend versus team which has sort of it shit together. You will actually find that those metrics are much better for teams which are operating consistently over months and months and months, rather than people who are just sacrificing everything to get anything done. So it's just actually not real speed.
And I mean, honestly, like this is the bit that Mayank was referring to right at the beginning, right? Which is that the focus is a currency, fear is a mind killer. These two things really matter because what they fundamentally impact is your ability to be consistent, right? And that if you really want to go fast, going faster is fundamentally not actionable. When you attempt to action going faster, you inevitably generate turbulence, right? The turbulence can manifest in any number of ways, right? Like bad code because people are working late nights, pile-ups of PRs not getting reviewed and merged, bad quality requirements, a disconnection between features and business metrics, just because we're trying to ship more features, right? All of these symptoms are what we are sort of loosely grouping under this turbulence isn't velocity, right? It is the illusion of speed. You feel like you're going fast, but actually what you're feeling is just adrenaline, right? Again, I'm a motorcycling junkie, but I always cite this particular example because it really resonated with me. There's this great documentary from 2004, I think, called Fast, which chronicles the rise of Valentino Rossi, who was until recently like one of the great champions, as he unseated the reigning champion of the time, who was Max Biaggi. And this was also explained to us when we were getting coached on the track, right? Basically, what was happening is if you look at the heart rate of the two guys as they were competing against each other in that era, Max Biaggi was like spiking, right? You can just basically see his adrenaline spiking. His heart rate is just like this. Every time he goes into a corner, it's just like boom, 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 boom. Whereas Valentino Rossi was just flat, right? Just super smooth. Now, what our coaches sort of explained to us using this information was that Rossi was basically riding. He wasn't trying to do 110%. He was staying just underneath his performance. Yes, that's Iceman versus Maverick is another great analogy from pop culture, right? But the idea is you want to keep your teams operating just under the limit of their performance envelope, not over. The moment they go over, they lose focus and they start becoming fearful. And then everything starts to get choppy. And you feel this adrenaline rush that, oh, we're cranking, oh, we're doing 110%. But the reality is, if you look at your numbers, you're actually going to drop those numbers. What you want to do is to keep your team just under that limit. While looking at your flow metrics, what is the rate at which stuff is flowing through the system from idea to production? PRD, user story, RCAs. What is the consistency in those? Am I seeing bursts? And every time, as a manager, really what you want to look for is that burst. Every time you see that burstiness, you most likely you're going to end up with a problem there. What you instead want to aim for is to get everything smooth and consistent, right? PRs, no clustering of PRs. Performance reviews. When performance reviews are happening in your teams, all of the feedback should not be clustered right at the end before the last date, right? 1 week before the review is due, everyone is like, all of this batch mode burst, volatility in every kind of aspect of execution of product is a huge smell for me. And the moment those things pop up, the next thing you will see is loss of focus and an increase in fear, right? I mean, I don't think I need to tell you like how many people, I'm sure most people in the room are in fact afraid of performance reviews, irrespective of which side of the table you're on, right? So so absolutely right? That's a great example of the kind of consequences that you see if you max out, try to go pedal to the metal. So really what we're arguing for here is very simple. There are very complex things that you can do at scale. Probably if you're at Google scale or something, you've got tens of thousands of engineers, probably worth the investments. But anything up to a few hundred people, it really boils down to this. One, you can't go faster. That's not actionable. Going faster is actually a second order effect of being smoother. And when we say be smooth, what we mean is look for burstiness in any aspect of execution. And there's a reason I carefully cherry pick performance reviews as well, right? It's all execution. We all know exactly how much productivity is lost during perf review season. It's not a joke, right? Like it's minimum like one month of 12 is just like lost because that stuff is bursty. And that's an optimistic number. Like a lot of people I've talked to say typically 2 months, and the worst examples I've heard are like 6 months, right? Like 6 months lost to this nonsense. So any aspect of what you're executing, whether it's how you gather requirements, how you do your OKRs. OKRs are a great example of a process that just drives burstiness into the system. You want to smooth it out. Don't aim for pedal to the metal. Aim to make sure it's smooth. It's okay to want to ramp it up, but even the ramp up has to be smooth. Simple, very on the ground metrics are things like teams which are consistently committing to more. I don't know what metrics everyone uses, but more velocity or stories week on week than they actually deliver. There is a consistent overflow, right? Teams that consistently estimate wrong and consequently are missing commitments. All of these are signs of burstiness. You want to go in there, and when you want to attack these problems, you want to look for what are people on the team afraid of. There's something for you to prioritize attacking. And second is, how do you increase the amount of free focus available to the team by just standardizing all of the regular shit that they would deal with, right? Like, downtimes, whatever, it doesn't matter, right? Just standardize and put in place drills. And that really was the argument we wanted to make. I want to mention that, by the way, I'm being pretty blasé about this, but this has been some of the hardest things to implement. They're very simple, but it's very hard.
They're really hard because they are counterintuitive. Like your instinct is to increase the batch size, you want to reduce the batch size. Your instinct is to push for more commitment. The right thing to do over is to reduce the amount of commitment.
Actually, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, man.
See, as I'm assuming we have a large engineering audience here, right? So
Yes.
For those who have done queuing theory 101, this is a no-brainer, right? If you understand queues, if you understand the burstiness nature, if you've ever used a message queue in your production system, you understand this inherently. The problem is making the decision makers understand, right? If they don't get it, there's nothing you can do, which kind of segues into the feature factory thing that Sidhu had mentioned earlier, right? The instinct there usually swings on either end of the spectrum. Either it is bursty, or on the other end you turn into a feature factory, neither of which helps.
Yeah.
A great book for the stakeholders to read in this particular case is Project Phoenix. It actually helped us in Gojek massively.
I mean, principles of product development flow So
Yeah.
Mayank had referenced principles of product development flow earlier, which is the textbook. But that is a hard read. I mean, I want to be very forthright about that. It's an essential read, but it's also a hard read. I think Phoenix
I would-
Project is a great read. Easy.
I would start with the Theory of Constraints by Goldratt. Once you wrap your head around it, then graduate to your Donald, the Don, basically, as I refer to him.
Yeah. Oh, Shobit's here as well. Okay. Yeah, the name of the book by Goldratt is The Goal. The Theory of Constraints book. The name of the book is The Goal. Again, like nothing we're talking about here is particularly original. No? I want to be very clear. All of this is straight out of the book. Right? Nothing new here. It's just that when you go out into the industry and you talk to people, yeah, like none of this stuff is out there. So just want to be very clear that all of this stuff you can get out of a book. Siva asked, what aspects are specific to software engineering? Now, this is where it gets interesting, right? I'm going to make a counter argument, right? Which is that I have a stance that everything is software engineering. If you're building a software product, how you describe your leave policy is software engineering, right? Which may sound like a cop-out, but trust me, it's not.
Opposite and a contra view on this. I would say that everything is operations, because these are all operations problems.
Yes.
These are not software engineering problems, right? This is not about the way you write code. It's about the way teams operate. It's an operations problem. Like majority of this actually comes from the operations research or the manufacturing plant. Of course, now over a period, there are differences in the way queues work, how many number of queues, what the packet sizes are there. That changes the theory, but really it's about operations, streamlining operations.
Actually, Aakash, that's something we didn't touch upon, right? I think that's sorry. There was someone going to go.
No, I was saying that 99% of the algorithms that we use for load balancing were developed in the 50s for solving supply chain problems during World War II. So nothing really has changed. It's just that it's getting packaged into shinier tools, and we tend to use it without thinking about it. I mean, I think the focus of this talk that Sidhu has brought up, I mean, the key takeaway that people should take from this is understand why before you follow the the herd and start to implement it blindly.
Yeah.
Actually, Aakash, let me stop you right there on the analogy to manufacturing. Software engineering is not like manufacturing, and the architecture I would refer here is Reinert's and other book, Managing the Design Factory. The fundamental difference is that in manufacturing, your process and your requirements are 100% known at the beginning, and you're doing the same thing again and again.
Yeah.
What we're doing is
the job size is constant over there. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Not disagree.
No, I think Aakash was saying that it's all operations, not that it's all manufacturing.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, absolutely valid, right? Like we can't extrapolate from manufacturing because they solve the problem differently. They just, they standardized each piece of work, which we can't do.
Well,
I mean, and don't
yes
want
and
to.
no. Yes and no, because manufacturing is now moving towards a lot size of 1, which is very close to what we experience as software developers. So there's a lot to be learned. Don't dismiss it offhand.
The reason I bring that up is because I have been there and I've seen this cautionary note struck, which is you read the goal and then try to directly apply it to software, which is a little dangerous, right? You have to read the goal and then you have to read Reinertson and then apply, because otherwise you try to standardize everything and that can be problematic. But yeah, sorry, there was one point I think that we missed talking about, just for completeness, which is that all of this assumes that you have competent people for a certain definition of competence that covers the complexity of the problem you have to solve, right? Now, just for completeness, like none of this matters if and which is why we were saying it's not a software engineering problem per se. It's only a software it doesn't, like, we're not talking about how you write the code because you're assuming that you've got that cracked, right? You've put together a team that knows how to write code for the problem at hand. Everything was working fine until you started scaling it up, and then it stopped working. But if you're slow because the team can't actually solve the problems that they've signed up for because of a capability issue, then that's an entirely different ballgame. We just want to be clear that that's not what we're talking about here. We're assuming you've already solved for that, and still things are slow. Cool, awesome. So we are reaching the end of our hour. Any more questions, comments, arguments, counter arguments? I hope everyone was okay with the format. Like, I think for this kind of audience, this was better, but I hope it was good for everyone. Ram, yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for bringing the Goal book into the picture. I did a certified production and inventory management course, the entire 5 exams 10 years ago, and the Goal was one of the kind of prescribed book. And I did apply, theory of constraints. Back then, I was overseeing a team which was handling like L3 process, and we did quite good of improvements. But then one challenge that I have seen since then is one is to have this knowledge, and second, even if you have competent people, ultimately when it comes to software, it's not just engineering. There are other departments that you collaborate with, starting with product management, the designers and everything, right? Getting everybody into that one element is the huge challenge. Like, you can talk about the whole thing behind the Goal or Phoenix project and everything for a lot of time, but ultimately getting everybody into that one one process is the most difficult thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I won't take away. I mean, there's a reason Aakash and I are founders. We're like, now we will say, this is how it shall be.
Yeah, you just segued into organizational design, which is a whole different topic altogether. So if we could talk for hours on this.
I mean, maybe we should on a different thing. But I mean, I'll ping you and we'll set something up. But we had one more hand raised, Tanvi.
That was my mistake, sorry.
No? Okay, awesome. Any other questions, comments before we wind up? No worries, Tanvi. All good.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Sidu. Thanks, Aakash. Very interesting talk. I think key takeaways: we are not special. We are all bricks in the wall, I think, is the key takeaway.
No,
But
not really. I'll rephrase that to say that those who forget history are doomed to repeat it over and over again. That is a better take on what Sidhu is saying. Learn from our predecessors.
awesome. Yeah, thanks so much. It was very,
Thanks so
very
much,
interesting.
Siva. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, everyone.
Cool.